Okay, we start a new Maimah today. Basi Legani, Tafshin Chav Beis. In the contrast here, it's on page Tes. Basi Legani Achoisi Kalom. Vaya Balei Lulem. Al Yisoid Maimah HaMedrash. Legani, when it says in the Pasuk Legani, what does it mean? Legnuni. To my private place, my private place of dwelling. Makim Shahaya Ikri Batchila. So why is this world called the Eibishter's Gnuni? Because this is the place where the primary presence of the Eibishter was in the beginning of creation. The Shechina was here below in this world by time of creation. Then through the Avedis that happened, so the Shechina was driven out, or at least it was concealed. And then there were 7 tzaddikim that came and brought the Shechina back down into this world. Ad Moshe Rabbeinu Roya Neman Shel Kol Yisrael, the faithful shepherd of all Yidden, Shahu Ashvi, and he's the 7th. V'chol Ashviin Chavivim, and all 7ths are cherished. Shehim Sheches Shechina Merikia Aleph La'aretz. He brought the Shechina down from the last Rakia down here to this earth below. This is the purpose, to create a dwelling for the Eibishter here below in this world. So this, according to the Medrash there, refers b'pashtus to the time of Matan Torah, when the Eibishter came down Vayered Avaya al Har Sinai. So when the Rebbe says Shezeu Tachlis Inyan, so what this means is that it's not only Moshe Rabbeinu that does one final step, that he brings the Shechina down into this world, but every one of the tzaddikim were working towards this. Like the lashon that's always brought when you get to Avram Avinu, that Avram Avinu began Matan Torah, preparation for Matan Torah, a certain connection to Matan Torah. You could see in his Aveda, it says in Chazal that from Avram Avinu starts the Shnei Alofen Torah, the 2,000 years that are related to Matan Torah. So it's not just that you have the Giluyim, that those tzaddikim will mamshech on their levels. They accomplish what they accomplished. Moshe Rabbeinu accomplishes what's negated to us here below. This is the tachlis of everything. All the elements of everything that exists, and all the Aveda of the tzaddikim up until Moshe Rabbeinu, it's all for this purpose. And Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that finally brings it down here below. In order that the Eibishter should remain here below in this world, and there should be a place, an established permanent place for the Eibishter's presence here in this world. Immediately after Matan Torah, when the Shechina came down here so the Eibishter commands Yidden to build the Mishkan. So it's interesting that it says here in this Maimer, Miyad la'achrem shachas hashchina, which the simple lashon sounds like that the mitzvah of building the Mishkan came immediately after Matan Torah. There's different opinions about this. According to Rashi, it didn't come until much later. There was the Chet Egel, and then all the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was in the mountain, and only later, after the Eibishter said Salachti Kidvarecha, then they got the mitzvah to build a Mishkan. So it wasn't miyad. In other words, according to Rashi, L'chatchila, this wasn't the plan, that they would need a Mishkan. The Eibishter was there with them, and that's it. They didn't need a Mishkan for this. After the Eibishter was concealed from them because of Chet Egel, Moshe Rabbeinu begged the Eibishter to come back and dwell amongst the Yidden, so then they got the mitzvah to build a Mishkan. But here he's going according to another opinion, which I believe is the opinion of the Zohar, that the mitzvah of building the Mishkan did come immediately after Matan Torah. And it wasn't just a result of Chet Egel, but it was for the purpose that he says over here, that in order for the Eibishter to be amongst the Yidden with a kviyas, that's accomplished through building the Mishkan. Or the lashon that it says in many other places is that the Gili B'Matan Torah was B'lderech Mumayla Mata, Vayered Avaya al Har Sinai. Or the lashon of the Medrash, Al Yoinim Yerdu L'Tachtainim, that the ones above come down below. And then there's what happened by the Mishkan, which is from below, that the Yidden from below create a home for the Eibishter by bringing all the materials and building them. So that's the Aveda of Tachtainim Yalal Al Yoinim. So, as the Medrash over there says, the whole purpose, in order to bring the Shechina down Lamata Ba'aretz, how do you bring the Shechina down Lamata Ba'aretz B'kviyas? And the Rebbe says here that you have to bring it B'kviyas. So what is the Kviyas? How do you accomplish this Kviyas? As long as the Hamshach is Mulmaila, it's not going to be Kviyas. Because if it's Mulmaila, that means that the world below is not a Keli for this. When there's Aveda Mitzad the Tachten, you're going to be Megala in the Mitzias of the Tachten, the Aveda of the Tachten Gufa, to make a Keli for the Shechina here in this world. So that is what creates the Kviyas. It's not just a Mulmaila, but the Welt itself should become a Keli for it. So therefore, the building of the Mishkan is a follow-up to be mamshich, that what was there, Mulmaila, by Matan Torah, that there should be the Aveda from below to build this Mishkan. So the Pasuk says, the B'inyan HaMishkan, the Mikdash, Ikri Mishkan, and Mishkan, Ikri Mikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is called a Mishkan, or not the Beis HaMikdash, the Mikdash, which is the holy place, is called a Mishkan, and Mishkan is called Mikdash. Two different expressions. So Nema, what does it say? That you build the Mishkan and the walls of the Mishkan itself are made from the Atzei Kroshim. From Kroshim, which are Atzei Shittim. So there are two expressions used here. Kroshim and Atzei Shittim. Mavaya Barucha, so on the Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe explains, Sha'isi is Keresh, Moirem Aloifen Aveda. These letters of Keresh refers to the Eifen Aveda V'yid, and all three letters of Keresh have a connection to L'umazeh. These are letters that have a connection to things that are Heipach Emes. And therefore you have to take this Keresh. The Eifen Aveda is to take the Keresh and to transform them all into Kedusha. Tachlus Aveda, what's the purpose of all this Aveda? Sheyiyu Atzi Shittim, that you should have Atzi Shittim. What is that? What are the Atzi Shittim? Shtus de Kedusha. It refers to the Shtus de Kedusha. Shizuya Aveda, Shalamayla Mitam V'das. This is when a person serves the Eibishter higher than reason and logic. Shayidezeh Misaknim, Misashitim, Shtus de Lo'umazeh. So through the Aveda of Shtus de Kedusha, you have the ability to be Misakin, the Shtus of Lo'umazeh. K'mayim, Razal, as the Gemara says, no dam Eiber Aveda, Elam Kein, Nichnas Boi Ruach Shtus. So whenever there is negative behavior in a person's life, so that it's based on a Ruach Shtus that overcomes him. And how do you deal with a Ruach Shtus? Not by trying to reason with the Ruach Shtus. Because if it's a Ruach Shtus, it doesn't understand Seichel. You have to have the Koyach, L'mayla Mitam V'das of Shtus de Kedusha, to be able to fight with the Ruach Shtus de L'umazeh. And not only fight, but actually transform it. Transform it into Shtus de Kedusha, or into a Keresh for the Mishkan. This fulfills the purpose of making a dir b'tachtainim by using the kroshim for the Mishkan and transforming the Shtus de L'umazeh into Shtus de Kedusha. That's the dir b'tachtainim. Who is the one that does this Aveda? Who has the ability to do this kind of Aveda, to take Shtus de L'umazeh and transform it into Shtus de Kedusha? So it's only Yidden. It's dafka through Yidden that the Torah and mitzvahs have their effect. So he's talking here not only about this inyan of Shtus de Kedusha. Shtus de Kedusha is something that's shaykh only by Yidden. Why? Because only a Yid has a neshama that's higher than Tam V'das, and therefore he could serve the Eibishter with that kind of a connection. So obviously that's only for Yidden. But not only b'negei to Shtus de Kedusha, but b'chlal, the pu'ula of Torah and mitzvahs that Yidden do in this world, that's given only for Yidden. Only the Yidden that have a neshama have the koyach to do all the Torah and mitzvahs. It continues there in the Maim of Basi Lagani, so therefore, Nikron, B'nai Yisrael, Gam B'Shem Tzivus Havaya, the Yidden are called Tzivus Havaya Miloshen Tzava. So the simple pshat of Tzivus Havaya is that the Yidden are an army. Yesh B'ay Gimel Pirushim, the word Tzivus Havaya or Tzava, the word Tzava means three different things. Tzava, Meloshin, and Shechayel. The simple pshat of Tzava is people that are in an army. Sheisrael, Heman Shechayel, Hamimalim, Umashlimim, Ritzainish, Shal Melech, Malchi, Amlach, HaKadosh Baruch. The Yidden are the ones that are here in this world. And they are part of Hashem's army to fulfill the will of the Eibishter here in this world. And Tzava is also Miloshin's Man Mugbal. Tzava means that there's a set amount of time. As we see the Lashon the Pasuk, it says, Alei Tzava le'enosh. Alei Yoretz. A man has a set amount of time here in this world. So what does this mean? So Pashtus, it refers to the fact that every person has the number of days in his life that the Eibishter gives him to fulfill his shlichus of his neshama in this world. She'inyin zem meire. So here the Rebbe teaches it on a deeper level. What this refers to is al oifen ha'aveda, how the aveda of a person should be done. Shekiyam atayra mitzvahs u'ba'oifen shel islapshus b'hagbolas hazman ha'mokim lamata. That the main focus of a Yid's aveda in this world is to do it within the frame of time. In other words, within the limitations of this world. Torah mitzvahs is specifically given in such a way that it's mugbal in zman ha'mokim in this world. A lot of mitzvahs are mugbal in zman. A lot of mitzvahs are actually not mugbal in zman. But every mitzvah is mugbal in mokim. Well, not necessarily in a specific mokim, and also not necessarily in a specific zman. So when he says here, in the hagbalas of zman mokim, he doesn't mean dafke the mitzvahs that are mitzvah zman grama, or the mitzvahs that could be done only in Eretz Yisrael, or only in the Beis HaMikdash, so it could only be done in a specific time. He means b'chlal. The fact that within the framework of time and space, every single mitzvah is given to be done by a yid here, dafke in zman mokim. Because why? Again, this is behemshach to what we said before. The yidden are in the tzava of the Eibishter to bring the shechina down lamata ba'aretz. So if a yid's aveda just consists of serving the Eibishter by trying to lift himself up out of time and space, where a person goes out of his akbalas, so then he's not fulfilling his shlichus in this world. The whole aved of a yid is to be in Welt, in Zman HaMokim, and there to do a mitzvah, there to bring the Eibishter down into this world. And then the third pshat, tzava, lashon tzivyon v'yofi. When you have beauty, when you have a tzivyon, which is when you have beautiful colors and shapes and beauty. Shinyan ha'yofi, and how do you have beauty? By the skal shel kama gvanim, when you have an inclusion of different colors. So this is another aspect of the Aveda, that you have to have the unity of all Yidden together. And every Yid adds another detail in the beauty of the Aveda. There's different Inyanim and Achtos. We learned this in the previous Maimarim. Basi when he spoke about this Inyan. You have an Inyan of Achtos, where it's the essence of the Yid, it's above any differences between one and another. It's at the Etzim, we're all the same. You can't say over there an Indian of beauty that is colors. Shenken over here, he's talking about bringing down that achtos into the mitzias of every person, where every person is different. But even there, where every person is different, it doesn't mean that they have to be separated from one another. Adarabah, the fact that they're different could be used in a way that they complement one another. And they even create a beauty by adding the different flavors of every person's Aveda. So pashtus, every person has to appreciate what he's supposed to do and what the other person is supposed to do, and therefore there's an achtus, there's a hiskalus. And through this aveda, so the aveda of transforming shtus l'omazeh to shtus kedusha, and again the 3 points here, which are the 3 nekudas of the attitude of a yid, the anshechayil, which is to have that absolute bittul, like when a person joins the army. And also to know where to focus on the Aveda. The focus of the Aveda is in the Welt, not to run away from this world, but Adarabah, in the Welt. And also every person with their prat, and to have the Achtus with all the Yidden. So all through all this, Nishlam, Ha'inyin, V'asili Mikdash, V'shachanti, B'seicham, V'chol Prati Aveda, K'fi Shenasim, Mitzad B'nei Yisrael, Lamata. So this is how we fulfill bringing the Eibush down in this world through the Aveda of Yidden here below. After the Friedrich Rebbe completes the first 2 Maimarim, so there's the Maimar of Basi Legani, and then which is 5 Vaisias, and then the Maimar of Hayesheves Baganim, another 5 Vaisias. So then Maisev Bahemshech Levayer, so he continues starting from Oisir Aleph, and he explains Shanaisnamul Maila as Levayer to explain as Hakayches Shanaisnamul Maila. What is the kayach that the Eibishter gives from above in order to be able to do and fulfill this Aveda? So regarding this Eitzer that the Eibishter gives Mulmaila, he gives a general introduction in Sifyad Aleph. And he explains, you talk about an army, so an army there's a battle taking place. When it comes to the Eibishter's name, which also one of the Eibishter's name is Tzvais, Shanas Hayedei Aveda de Tzavam. So this name of the Eibishter is brought about or is reached through the Aveda of Yidden here below, when they serve the Eibishter like in an army, fighting in a battle. So the Medrash says, B'negeya, to the fact that the Eibishter's name is Tzvais, Keshani Oise, Milchama B'Rishayim, and Nikra Tzvais. When the Eibishter is fighting with Rishayim, that's the Eibishter's name Tzvais. The Medrash describes each one of the names is another midah of the Eibishter. So the midah of the Eibishter are fighting with Rishayim is the name Tzvais. So regarding Yidden, what this refers to is Sheklol, as Avedis B'nei Yisrael, B'Hanagas and Ba'Elam. Durach gain the Welt. Generally speaking, the Aveda of Yidden when they go through this world. When they experience life in this world, it's not just go through as in the sense of like passing through. But when a person lives life in this world, Al Pi Atayro Mitzvahs, and to live life in this world according to demands of Tayro Mitzvahs. And v'liv fa'il sha'aylam yisnayig al pi Tayro Mitzvahs. And not just to do Tayro Mitzvahs, but also to affect the world around them. That everything in the world should behave according to the demands of Tayro and Mitzvahs. The life of a person, of a Yid in this world, is a life of a Mulchama. As the Zohar says, the bread that you eat in this world, it's at the tip of a sword. Anytime a Yid interacts with Eilam Hazeh, there's a battle taking place. Why? Especially based on what we just learned in Tanya these days. The Alter Rebbe explains, every time a person eats or whatever, it's not only eating. Eating is one example. The example of eating is always brought because that's something that a person does daily, constantly. But it's the same thing when you get to all activity of a person in Eilam Hazeh when he interacts with Eilam Hazeh. It could either be done l'shem shemayim, or it could be done for yeshus, or for a own personal thing, not connected to the Eibishter. So there's always a mulchama taking place of how the person will interact with Eilam Hazeh. There's also connected to what it says in this week's parsha, b'tzloisi, b'vausi, b'charbi, b'kashti. And get to the Aveda, the mulchama, it's called b'charbi, b'kashti, that Yaakov says. So here the Friedrich Rebbe explains, sheb'mulchama yesh beis inyanim. When it comes to a war, there are two types of wars. Ha'alef, lishla, shalol, v'lov izbaz. One is that the war is being fought in order to gain whatever shalol and baz you can get from this. Give me the English words, please. No, it's not. Booty. It's not a Booty. Spoils. Loot. Okay. Wow. Great. Amazing. So when you fight a war, and it's not that there's something that you feel that your life is in risk and you have to fight, so because there's something that's really hanging in balance. You have a king. You have a king that's fighting. He decides he wants to expand his territory. He wants to get more money. He wants to get more possessions. So they fight a war for their sake. That's one kind of a war. Which is so they're fighting for the victory that it should be like the king wants. Meaning, if the king himself feels like that his own throne is being threatened and the people are not listening to him, whether there's an outright rebellion or not an outright rebellion, or the king is fighting for himself, for his own sake, for his own being, for his own ratzon, to be listened to. So then he's not fighting for anything that he can gain, but he's fighting for the ratzon, for himself, for the melech himself. That's a much deeper inyan of Mulchama. So he says that this is the ikir inyan of Mulchama. So the Rabbi explains it. When you fight a Mulchama just for the spoils that you get from this. So here you're fighting with a certain cheshbon. What is it exactly that I'm going to gain? And so you're fighting for that purpose. So if that's the gain that you're looking for here, so you're going to calculate how much is it worth investing into this war, that it should be worth it for what you're going to gain through this war. You're not going to invest billions of dollars and it's going to bring you something which is worth less than that. So it's all relative. So therefore, this is what's called the ikra mulchama. Ikra mulchama, you're not really fighting like when you fight all the way to the last ounce of energy. A person's ready to die in a mulchama. He's fighting for his life. Over here, there's a cheshbon. It's not the mulchama is not the point. The point is the shalal and the baz that comes through the mulchama. The mulchama is a means to an end. The mulchama is sort of an investment to get to that. So you have to see how much that investment it pays off. The ikir of Mulchama is when the melech sees that it's his ratzon that's at stake here. We're talking about the ratzon of a melech, which is connected to the melech himself, his whole identity as a king. That if his ratzon is not being followed, so that touches his whole being as a king. So that, here, it's not possible to make a cheshbon. What will he gain? What will he not gain? It's negate his whole metzius. So over here, he's ready to fight until the very end. So therefore, over here, going back to using this all as a mashal, l'mayla, that there's also the giluyim that come l'mayla, and these giluyim l'mayla are accomplishing a certain purpose. But then there's the ikir amulchama l'mayla, that's negated to the essence of the Eibishter himself. Not because of any gain or any giluyim, any stages in the Seder Shtalshlus of what creation accomplishes, but what the essence, what's negeh, so to speak, the ratzon of the Eibishter himself, Nisava. And mitzad that, we have to be here to fulfill that kavanah, and it's negeh to the Eibishter himself. So therefore, it's a kind of aveda that's l'mayla mitam v'das. Shalachei nidreshes gam aveda mumatali is boifim kazeh. So below, the aveda to fulfill this battle, or to fight this battle, that is, to fulfill the Eibishter's kavanah, so then it's demanded also that it should be l'mayla mitam v'das. Commissioners bar le'el sha'aveda tzricha is ba'if and shal shtus de kedusha l'mayla mitam v'das. The aveda v'yid has to be with shtus de kedusha. But here is giving you a much deeper understanding of why aveda has to be l'mayla mitam v'das. Before he said, why does a yid have to serve the Eibishter l'mayla mitam v'das? Because you're dealing with a nefesh bahamis. That's l'mata mitam v'das. That's irrational. So how are you going to respond to him? How are you going to deal with him? Only through a neshama, which is l'mayla mitam v'das, could you overcome that kind of a challenge. Over here he's saying something else, not mitzad the nisyanis you have. That practically it's the only way to overcome your nefesh bahamis. Mitzad the kavana al yaina. If you want to fulfill the Eibishter's ratzon, the nisava kadosh baruch hu, the ratzon of the Eibishter, which is l'mayla mitam v'das, how do you connect to that? And how do you really fight that kind of a war? Through a bittul l'mayla mitam v'das. If a person is serving the Eibishter with giluyim, with the seichel, with any of his midas, or whatever other ruchnis, the aspect there is inside of him, so then he's not connecting to the essence of the Eibishter. So then it's serving the Eibishter on the level of a mulchama, where there's a certain gain that the person feels that he has in his Torah mitzvahs. Just like Lamaila, there's that level of Torah mitzvahs that comes down from its source. It's melubish in a seichel, whether it's mishpatim, or any other darg of giluyim that there is Lamaila. So that's also in Yinim Lamaila. As I mentioned last time when we learned this, that you find in Sifrei Zoya, Kabbalah, that there's reasons for creation. It's on a certain level of Seder Shtalshlus. If you're serving the Eibishter with your own personal gain that's involved in it, whether Gashmias, whether Ruchnias, or even on very high levels that you want to become one with the Eibishter, whatever gain a person is serving the Eibishter with, so that's connected to a certain dag of Giluyim L'mayla. But that's not the Mulchama that we're talking about here. Here we're talking about the Mulchama mitzad the Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu. This is the Ratzon of the Melech, this is Kaviyachal Negei to the Eibishter himself, or maybe without a Kaviyachal. Obviously, over here, it doesn't mean that anybody is threatening the Eibishter, but he decided that this is what he wants, and that's the Nisava of the Eibishter. So to connect and serve the Eibishter on this level, it's only through an absolute bittul of L'mayla mitam v'das, where there's no gain that the person is thinking about whatsoever. And for this battle that a Yid fights here below in this world, Paischem mevazbezim es ha'eitzres. The Eibishter opens up, and not only opens up, but he's mevazbez. He completely squanders all his treasures. Hayikarim, the very expensive treasures. Shayitumunim mikamadaitis, that were hidden away for many generations. And they're given over l'pkidei achayil b'shvil anshei achayil. They're given over to the generals to give for whom? For the anshei achayil, that they should have what they need to be able to fight the war. Through this assistance that comes from squandering all these hidden treasures, they will be victorious in their battle. And that fulfills the ratzon of the king. So there's the Pekidei Achayil, which you can probably say refers to the Rebbe, the Pekidei Achayil of every generation. They're the ones that get these tremendous kaychis. For what purpose? To give it to the Yidden of their generation, to the Anshe Achayil, the foot soldiers that are fighting, the daily Mulchama. This if where the Friedrich Rebbe talks about this Mulchame and the fact that there's an Oster and that the Eibishter opens up this Oster, this is an introduction to the points that the Friedrich Rebbe talks in the next Ois going forward. The Friedrich Rebbe comes and explains, so what is this Kayach that the Eibishter gives? Generally, he says that this is the hidden treasures. And now, for the purpose of fighting and winning this war, the kavanah is to open up these treasures. And not only to open up, but and then to give it different stages in the hamshacha. There's opening, and then there's giving. And then when you give, you can give in a lot of different ways. So the giving should be in such a way of tiftach. The Eibishter's treasure. So it says there, it's tzarcha, your treasure. In other words, it refers to a level of a treasure that only the Eibishter knows of. It's totally concealed of us. As we'll learn in the Hemshech. And that it's tzarcha, not a tzarcha hatoiv, lanu tiftach, with a comma between toiv and lanu, but toiv lanu goes together, that it should be open and revealed good to us. That's the chiddush of the treasure, that the Eibishter opens up the treasure. So this is probably connected to the point that Alter Rebbe speaks about in Tanya Perek Chavav, that usually when you talk about such a high, deep treasure, that's what's called hanistaris la'avaya l'keinu. Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, when a person has a situation which is painful in this world, what does it really mean? Because it's coming from such a high place, so therefore it can't come down in this world as a revealed good. It can't. In other words, it's a different kind of good, and it's translated in this world as negative. That's usually the way that Eitzah reaches us. The Chiddush here is, on one hand, we're taking from Eitzar Cha, from the deepest hidden treasure from Alma de Iskasya, and yet it should be opened up and it should come down to us in a manner of Atoiv Lanu. B'yachad, so the Rebbe says, on one hand, the Makabel feels that it's Toiv Shaloi, but we're not minimizing the source of where this comes from. It doesn't come from Alma de Iskasya. It comes B'yachad, in Meyaisa, Nimshach, Me'a'etzer, Sastumim, Shemalamayla.
We're in the Maimer Basi Lagani, Tavshin Chav Beis. We're holding at Se'iv Beis. So the Rabbi here is talking about the Oitzer. It says in the Maimer, the Friedrich Rebbe, that there's a Oitzer Lamaila. The last thing we learned yesterday was Eitzarcha, Hatoiv Lanu Tiftach. That we're talking about Eitzarcha, the deepest and highest treasure that is so concealed that it's the Eibishter's. It's above all levels. And yet, when it comes down, the Eibishter opens it up in a way that it's toiv lanu. That's this concept of when it says in the Maimer that the Eibishter opens up these eitzres and the Eibishter is mevazbez these eitzres. What does it mean? There's always a hashpah that comes from these eitzres, but it comes in a way of an eitzer, which means it remains concealed from us. However, what we're asking is, or what the Eibishter does give is, he gives toiv anirva anigla. That's really the psich and the bizbuz of the eitzres, that it comes down in a way that we can see the goodness of it. Friedrich Rebbe continues to explain in Sif Yud Beis, related to the 12th Hilula of the Friedrich Rebbe, and we're learning it now for the fourth time from Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud, which this year is going to be 72 years. Wow. Yeah, from Tavshin Yud to Tavshin Pei Beis. So to explain more in detail, what is this Oitzer L'mayla? After he gives the general introduction, that the concept of this Oitzer is that they usually gives the keiches necessary for the foot soldiers that are fighting the battle in this world. So the Friedrich Rebbe says, to understand what is this Oitzer L'mayla by the Eibishter. And he goes on to explain the inyan of Eir Ein Sof, as we'll see soon. But first, the Rebbe stops and explains what's b'chlal this concept of an oitzer. If you compare the mashal to the nimshal, so there's a question here. What the Friedrich Rebbe is coming to explain is at first glance, it's not understood. What does this mean? That there's a treasure by the Eibishter that is higher than the other aspects of the king, of the Eibishter. Now, what was the example for this? That it's like by a treasure that a king in this world has, that he's not interested in opening it, shtamish boy, or to use it, avur tzrachav, for his daily needs. Kivim shechasa alav jalavetim, it's something that, I don't know how to type jalavet in English, but it remains, he leaves it alone. Now you have the word? You're going to say something? It's not okay, but it's not coming from a place of stinginess. It's not what it means over here. Jalavet means it comes because it's something that's so precious and so sentimental, something that's so that it's not shaykh to be used. It's
an heirloom.
An heirloom. Okay. And to end it in the mashal, we also say that it includes gam kol nesa v'nikpatz b'dayre shelifneza. That it's a treasure that you gather from one generation to the next. And there's all kinds of artifacts, and there's all kinds of antiques, and all kinds of a treasure that is left there to be untouched. V'hu yakar yaiser mikol tzarchei hamelech. So in the mashal, the point is that this is something that's more precious than any of the other needs that the king has every day. For the king himself, for everything to function there in the palace, they don't pay the bills from these antiques that are sitting in the treasure house or so on. That's something that remains secluded, and even if there's a shortage in whatever they need on a daily basis, they don't go to this oitzer to fill in, to pay from it. That remains separated, jalavet, you don't touch it. But then there's the tzarchei hamelech on a daily basis, the basic needs that there are for the king and in the palace and so on. The question is, how does this work out in the nimshal? The eina move on. So now it's not understood. How could you say by the Eibishter sheyeshnoi inyan shuhu bepchinas tzarchei hamelech, that there's something l'mayla by the Eibishter that's on this level that kaviyachol the Eibishter needs it? What does this mean, l'mayla, when you say that this is something the Eibishter needs? It's very different than when you say l'mata by a king, that a king needs something. Talking about a king, you're talking about a human being that's limited. The needs of the king come from a place of limitation. He needs to eat, he needs to, whatever else there are the needs of the melech. L'mayla, when you say tzarchei hamelech, what is the concept of tzarchei hamelech? It's not a need, a shortcoming that the Eibishter is relying on something, no such a thing. So the concept of tzarchei hamelech l'mayla is what the Eibishter wants.
But where's the tzarchei hamelech over there?
That's what it says. I'm reading the Maimer.
I know the Maimer says that.
Yeah. Well, he didn't mention it before, but he's explaining now this mashal.
Yeah,
that there's the oitzer that's used. Of course not. No, that's the whole point that he's saying it. Just a second, 1 second. Let me just explain the point there. Lamata by a human being, when you have a melech basav adam, so there's the hagbala, there's the melech who he is by hagbala, which is expressed how legabe his tzrachim every day. And for that, you have whatever resources to pay the bills. And then you have the Oitzer HaMelech. That's not shaykh to the Hagbal of the Melech. That's shaykh to the Etzem HaMelech. And therefore, it's not something that you use every day. And Adarabah, it's shaykh to him, to his father, to his grandfather. It remains there, Migdoirei Deiris. Not only is it not shaykh to your individual tzrachim, it's not even shaykh specifically to your whole tzir b'chlal. It's shaykh to the Melucha. The Melucha has this Oitzer. So that we understand. Well, a mile by the Eibishter, when you talk about tzarchei hamelech, so what's the nimshal of tzarchei hamelech by the Eibishter? What the Eibishter needs is a result of what the Eibishter himself decides he wants. There are no needs l'mayla if the Eibishter didn't decide he wants it. So if so, tzarchei hamelech is something already that's very deep. This is what the Eibishter himself wants. So what's higher than that? What's higher than what the Eibishter himself decided he wants? So if so, let's see inside the mind, we're going to move on. This is what the Eibishter himself needs. In other words, the Eibishter decided that he wants this. And to fulfill what the Eibishter needs or wants, you don't touch these high revelations, these treasures. Remains hidden. Only when there's a mulchama, and then you have to be poil. You have to bring about a victory like the king wants for the purpose of the ratzon of the melech. So then there's an inyan that you open up these treasures. So what does this mean? How is this higher than the tzarchei hamelech? How do you explain this? That there's the ratzon of the melech when there's a matzav of a mulchama, and that's higher than the tzarchei hamelech. What's the nimshal for this Lamaila? Tzarchi HaMelech is also the Eibishter himself, what he wants. For what the Eibishter needs, you don't use these treasures. But for what the Eibishter wants, you do use these treasures. The nimshal doesn't make sense. There's no such a thing of needs versus wants. Whatever he needs is what he wants. So, and if he decides he wants it, so he needs it. So you could have that in a mulchama, or you could have that in tzarchi HaMelech l'mayla b'chlal. So what's this Indian over here? What's the nimshal over here? And the question goes even further. If you look at these two things, however we would explain what this nimshal is, but if you would say that there's the tzarchi HaMelech l'mayla, and then there's the ratzon that of the melech when it comes to mulchama. Which one of these two are higher? So the pashtus, you would say that the ratzon of the melech, when there's a matzav of a mulchama, that's the melech where there's a certain matzav of yirida, where there's a level of an opposition, and there's a battle, and there's the ratzon of the melech that he has to fight this opposition. That's the ratzon of a melech as it relates to a mulchama. Whereas the tzorech of the melech himself, we're talking l'mayla, the tzorech of the Eibishter, which is what the Eibishter decided he needs, not related to any opposition, not related to any mulchama b'chlal. His tzorech, removed to himself. So l'chayra, that's higher. The tzarchi HaMelech l'mayla should be greater than a matzav of a mulchama. So again, le'idach dafke b'mulchama in menagid, specifically when we're talking about a war that's taking place with an opposition, which is l'chayra inyan of a yiride. There's a menagid here. You're going down from where the melech is really supposed to be. That's when you open up the treasure that there is above. So in other words, if you would want to explain in the nimshal the difference between tzarchi HaMelech and the ratzon HaMelech and a mulchama, the only way to explain the difference is that the tzarchi HaMelech is what the melech needs for himself. What's the nimshal for that? The Eibishter l'mayla is removed of everything, and there's no opposition here b'chlal. And the ratzon HaMelech and a mulchama is a matzav of the melech when he comes down. When he relates, when there's a matzav where he's threatened, and there's a yirida and the gilia lekus in the veld, and therefore there's a matzav of a mulchama. So if anything that's lower in the nimshal, comes out that the matzav of a mulchama is not higher than the tzarchi, it's lower than the tzarchi HaMelech. And here we're saying that dafka for this ratzon the mulchama, that's when you open up the treasure.
Yeah, the oitzer is higher. The purpose now is not a lower purpose, but you have to go to a higher source in order to solve.
Okay, good. I hear. Could be. So maybe that's the answer to the Maimon. But in Pashtus, it's hard to understand. What you see here is that the mashal and the nimshal, it's sort of upside down. It's not exactly the same. In the mashal, you understand what tzarchi HaMelech means. Tzarchi HaMelech is lower. Tzarchi HaMelech is that dag of the king where he's limited, where he has Mashenkel L'mayla. Tzarchi HaMelech is not any lower than ratzon HaMelech. If anything, it's higher. So there has to be a different shot over here of how we explain this inyan, that there's something that touches the melech so deeply that triggers the melech to the point that he's ready to open up all these eitzers. That's really the question here. So what is this deeper inyan that the melech is now ready to open up these eitzers for? And usually by Yisrachim he's not. So for this, the Frierdiker Rebbe starts explaining to understand what this treasure is above. So this is based on what it says in the Tikkun Zayar. Oirein Seif L'mayla Adin Kates L'mata Adin Tachlis. It says L'mayla Adin Kates and there's L'mata Adin Tachlis. And what is the Oitzer? The Oitzer is the L'mayla Adin Kates, that level that's totally concealed of us. And actually, Kamon Siv Zayin, as the Rebbe is going to explain later, that the Chiddush of the Oitzer is that usually the Oitzer is L'mayla Adin Kates. But over here, when the Eibishter opens up the Oitzer, that Oitzer, which is going usually L'mayla, will be Nimshach L'mata also. It will be Nimshach into L'mata Adin Tachlis. And how? And what Oifen? It will retain the same Koyach that it had, the same Ein Sof that it has in the L'mayla Adin Kates, but it'll still be revealed to us in the same way that the level of L'mata Adin Tachlis is revealed to us. It'll have the Maila of both, like you said before. Haitzarcha hatoiv lanu. Come on, Siv Zayin. Until we get to Siv Zayin, we have a long way. So before we understand what L'mayla Adin Kates means, or L'mata Adin Tachlis means, we first need to know what is the taich of Oirein Sof. Hinei be'inyan Oirein Sof yesh shnei pirushim. When it comes to the translation of Oirein Sof, so there are two meanings here. Pirush ha'alef, one pshat of Oirein Sof is Oir shel Ein Sof. There's a revelation that comes from a source, from the Eibishter himself. And the Eibishter himself, his greatness, is described as Ein Sof. But what's the Oyer? The Oyer itself is not Ein Sof. It comes from Ein Sof. That's one pshat. Pirish HaBeis, and there's a second. Again?
It's the light from Ein Sof.
The light that comes, that emanates, or that shines out from Ein Sof. So Ein Sof is describing the Eibishter himself. Pirish HaBeis, but then there's another pshat. Sheha'oyer atzmo Ein Sof. That this Oyer is Ein Sof. The description of Ein Sof, which is the description of Bli Gvul, it's the Oyer that's Ein Sof. Not that it comes from a place which is Ein Sof. It itself is Ein Sof. So on the Maimer he explains, in the subject that we're talking about over here, what it's saying is that the Oyer itself is Ein Sof. Not that it comes from Ein Sof, but the Oyer itself is Ein Sof. What's the reason that we're saying that the Oyer is Ein Sof and not that the Oyer comes from Ein Sof? Because in the true expression of Ein Sof, so haloshen Ein Sof koi rak al inyan ha'oyer. This expression of Ein Sof could only relate to the level of Oyer. It can't go on the source. Regarding the source where the Oyer comes from, the term Ein Sof is not correct. It does not properly say what's going on over here. I don't want to use the term define. I mean, when we're talking about the Eibishter himself, describe the Eibishter or define the Eibishter, it's not. All those terms are borrowed terms, and it's not correct terms. But just for the sake of the subject, the point over here is that you can't say that Ein Sof is talking about the Eibishter, the source of the Oyer. Rather, what does it go on? Koi rak al inyan halosh Ein Sof koi rak al inyan Oyer. Only refers to the Oyer. L'maylo yaser u'inyan shel shem. Higher even than Oyer, there's an inyan of Shem, a name. Should become a pratim Shem v'Oyer in Yonim Echad. Regarding many details, Oyer and Shem are the same thing, but Shem also has aspects that is higher than Oyer. Okay, this is a separate sugya. I'm not going to stop on this. Let's go weiter. So the reason why you can't send the Eibishter himself Ein Sof, so this is brought in the Alter Rebbe brings a look at the Torah. Bahagdome b'sefer Yonas Elam u b'sefer Pelach Harima. So in two of his svarim he says, Lama nikra Oyer Ein Sof. Why is the Eibishter referred to as Oyer Ein Sof? Shulachayre hayerai l'kraisai ein le'tchila. The more correct term is to use the Eibishter ein le'tchila. There's no beginning. Daina shehu kadmon. The Eibishter is a kadmon. That the description of kadmon is something that you could say only about the Eibishter himself. So that would be the right term, that the Eibishter is kadmon, there's nothing before him. Everything else has a source. The Eibishter himself is it, he has no source. So why would we say Ein Sof? Ein Sof means that he's Bli Gvul in the Sof, and how far the gili of it is, or it's endless, Bli Gvul, Vahabat, the beginning. So the right term to use is Ein Le'tchila, that the Eibishter is a kadmon.
This question is about the Eibishter himself, so why is he in the word Oyer here?
Okay, good. And the Chanami, that's all fine, true. But according to the pshat according to the first pshat, when you say Oyer Ein Sof, so you're saying that the Oyer comes from Ein Sof, right? So the Oyer and Ein Sof are two things. There's the Oyer and the Oyer comes from Ein Sof. So the Rama is saying that if you're going to say that the taich of Oyer Ein Sof means that the Oyer comes from Ein Sof, so the Lashon Ein Sof goes on the Eibishter himself, so then the question is, why Oyer Ein Sof? It should say Oyer Ein Tchila. Oyer, the Oyer of Ein Tchila. And then he says, that when you have a kadmon, something that has no beginning, definitely has no end. It goes together. If you have no beginning, so your whole existence is not defined b'chlal. So then b'derech mamela, that means that there's no end. Anything that has a source, so b'derech mamela has to have some kind of definition. So l'chayre has to have a sof also, has a certain aschala, certain sof. These two things usually go together. If you have no aschala, so then you have no sof either. So kol ki b'chlal kadmon b'vaday nitzchi. Aval b'chlal nitzchi ain't kadmon. But just because something is ein sof, it doesn't mean that it's a kadmon. It doesn't mean that there's nothing that caused it, that it has no source. The Fishel sichlim hanevdalim. You have these creations that are on a very high level. Sichlim, nivdalim, these are The literal translation of Sichlim Nivdalim means that these are Nivraim that have great minds that are totally removed of anything that we know over here. Let's say Lamashal Malachim. Malachim, Pashtus, and that's what it refers to. Stam, it says that some creations exist. They are nitzchis. They could exist eternally because of the ratzon of the Eibishter that's inserted in them. There's a koyach of ein seif. There's a koyach mitzad the ratzon of the Eibishter that therefore they are ein seif. But it's not that they be'etzem are ein seif. There's a ratzon of the Eibishter in them that causes them to be ein seif. Afal pisha heim mechodashim ayin liyesh. Even though they are mechodashim. Chodashim ayin liyesh. In other words, not only are we talking about something which is a gilui and has a source, but even something which is mechodesh, ma'ayin liyesh. Mechodesh means it's a new creation. We're not talking about something that comes out b'derech gilui from the source, but a new being that comes into being. Ma'ayin liyesh. Haynu sheyesh lem tchila. I don't know if Imamish means the term ma'ayin liyesh over here in the sense the way it's used, b'negeta yesh, b'negeta nivra mamish, okay, whatever the type of here is. The point is that just because something is ein seif, it doesn't mean that ein leit chila. But when it's ein leit chila, then it's ein seif. Okay. Okay, so therefore the question is, why do we say that the Eibishter is ein seif? We should say the Eibishter is ein leit chila. And the answer is, so the Rama answers, the Masha anu kairin ein seif. When we say the term ein seif, ein retzainoi loimar l'tayr mohusev atzmusi yis'ala chas v'shalom. We are not giving a description to the Eibishter himself, chas v'shalom, that he is ein seif. El rak l'b'chinas shmo yisbarach. This term ein seif only goes in the Eibishter's name. Shu b'chinas oir v'ziv she'ein lei seif. That it refers to a revelation of the Eibishter, and that revelation is ein seif. That revelation has a tchila. It comes from a source, but nevertheless, it's so powerful that it extends ein seif. But not that it doesn't have a tchila. So it doesn't go on the Eibishter himself. The Rabbi adds another point here. Kiv in Shaimrim, what's the lashon that the Zohar says over here? She'er zel l'mayla den kates l'mata den tachlis. That this oir is ein kates. It goes l'mayla den kates and l'mata den tachlis, whatever the pirish is, but ein kates and ein tachlis means ein seif. So right here in the lashon of the Zohar, you see haynu she'ein boyak balus. So it's describing the oir. Even if you're going to say that the taich of oir would be oir shel ein seif, but then how are you going to translate the continuation? L'mayla ad ein kates and l'mata ad ein tachlis. That's for sure not going on the source itself. By the Eibishter himself, there's no mayla and there's no mata. It doesn't extend anywhere. There's no etzem is not mispash. It doesn't go anywhere. The etzem is it. So when you say l'mayla ad ein kates, l'mata ad ein tachlis, that also proves that the lashon of ein seif refers to the oir, not to the Eibishter himself. So we see in this lashon that it's the oir that's ein seif. Okay, but now here's the thing. Based on what we just learned, so what would it come out? What are we saying here? The source itself is ein leit chila. The oir that comes out of the source, that's on a much lower level. That's yesh leit chila. It's a kadmai. But ein seif. It's only ein seif. So l'chayra, that means that there's a big difference, or there's a big gap over here between the source and the oir. The oir is on a much lower level. It's only ein seif. But that's not the pshat over here. Adarabah. As we'll see in the Hemshech, the Rebbe is going to explain, the pshat of oir ein seif is because oir is b'chlal not a metzias for itself. The oir is just a reflection of what the moir is, even more than a reflection. I don't know if the term reflection is right. So the way it seems until here is not. Let's continue going there. So now he comes and explains in the Maimer So now why is it that the oir itself is ein seif? So he says because the oir is like the moir itself, it's me'ena moir. The correct translation is not like. I mean that's a very poor translation. The oir me'ena moir means, as we'll see soon, the Rebbe will explain what the pshat of oir me'ena moir means. But the only reason why the oir is ein seif is because it's me'ena moir. Okay, now how does this make sense? The Rebbe just said that you have nivraim that beratzon habayre could be ein seif. So then we just say that ein seif is not because it's me'ein hamoir, But that's not beide. The Eibishter decided that something should be Ein Sof. It's a Nivra, he's not Mein Amor. Sichlim Nivdalim, these Malachim. A Malach is Mein Amor. A Malach is a revelation that's Mein Amor. No. A Malach is a Nivra, a very high Nivra, a very Ruchni-zig Nivra. But yeah, a Nivra. And he's Ein Sof. And now the Rebbe is saying, the only reason why the Oyer is called Ein Sof is because the Oyer is Mein Amor. Okay, what? You hear what I'm asking or not?
Not sure.
What's this union of Ein Sof? Is Ein Sof, could you call something Ein Sof, which is a creation, and it's Ein Sof, berotzen abayre. The Eibish's rotzen is mislabish. The Eibish's rotzen, which is Ein Sof, is mislabish, and this nivra to be Ein Sof. Or do you refer to something that's Ein Sof only if it's a Oyer, and it's a revelation of the source, and only then could it be Ein Sof? So here in the Maimer he explains that you know why it's Ein Sof, because it's Me'ein Amor. What's the pshat in this? So it's explained in another place, and this is the Bikir in the Hemshech of Samach Vav. So he says there, this that we say over here, that the Oyer itself is Ein Sof. Not that it's an Oyer from Ein Sof, but the Oyer itself is Ein Sof. So l'chayr stirim minei bay. This very description of Oyer, Ein Sof, contradicts itself. Share'in yena Oyer kishmoy kainhu. What's Oyer? The name itself says what it is. Ha'arabul vad. It's just a ray. So it's nothing. What is it? A ray of something is nothing in itself at all. So how could I say that this is truly Ein Sof? What's the true concept of Ein Sof? That it has absolutely no akbalis whatsoever. So here, in these words, you see at least the answer to the question that I just asked. When you say the concept of Ein Sof, there's two different interpretations of what Ein Sof means. There's Ein Sof as a description, as something which is actually a certain limitation. Ein Sof itself is also a certain limitation. Or there's Ein Sof la mitosai shel inyan. Shehainu she'ein by agbalis klal. The emes inyan of Ein Sof. It's a different concept of Ein Sof. What is the point of here? Ein Sof in itself, the pashtus, think about this very simply. Bli gvul and gvul, are they opposites? Could bli gvul tolerate gvul? Could gvul tolerate bli gvul? No, they're opposites. So bli gvul means that it's unlimited, it's nitzchi, it's eternal, it's Ein Sof. No, it depends. Bli gvul itself could also be a certain limitation, that it's bli gvul. There's a certain mode, a certain tenua of how this is expressed, that it's Ein Sof. But it's not gvul though. The emes is, the chayr, it goes even a step higher than this. I think I mentioned this last time when we learned the other maimer. Even if you're going to say that this is such a level of bli gvul that's so powerful that it also has the shleimus of gvul as well. Like the famous Avodas HaKodesh, that when you have something which is so bli gvul, so that it has no limitations, and therefore even gvul is also part of this bli gvul. But it's still not the emes inyan of bli gvul. What's the emes inyan of bli gvul? The emes inyan of bli gvul is when you have absolute pshitus, when you have no tzir whatsoever, and you can't define it and describe it in any way. Not even by the fact that it has in it gvul and bli gvul. That's also not the emes inyan of bli gvul. The emes inyan of bli gvul is when you have pure pshitus, where there's no level, no description, nothing whatsoever. That's the emes inyan of bli gvul. Ein bo yakbalis klal. So where is it be'emes shaykh to say the inyan of Ein Sof? Only on the Eibishter himself. So now we come back to the point that we said before. The emes ataych of Ein Sof only goes on the Eibishter himself. And the emes says, if you look there in the Maimer Samach Vav, he brings there from other Mekubalim that said that Ein Sof means the Oyer Shel Ein Sof. And they said, why? Why did they taich that way? Because the emes ataych of Ein Sof, you can only say about the Eibishter himself. Anything other than the Eibishter himself, when you say that it's Ein Sof, it's already a Ein Sof which is describing a certain metzius. However high you're going to explain this musig of Ein Sof, it's a description of a certain metzius. So it's not truly Ein Sof. Behechrich, that it has some kind of definition, some kind of agbalah to it, of what this metzius is. Only the Eibishter himself, you say that he's Ein Sof. So the emes inyan of Ein Sof only goes on the Eibishter. So that's why there are Mekubalim that argue with this Ramah, with the Ramah that says that the Ein Sof goes on the Oyer. But nevertheless, as the Rebbe said before, it's true. On one hand, it's taka true that the term Ein Sof could only be said about the Eibishter himself. But yet, it's still not the right term to use. Still, Ein Lo Tchila is more correct. Because the Metzius is that the term Ein Sof describes different concepts of Ein Sof, and you could have Ein Sof even in a place where it's Yesh Lo Tchila. Ein Lo Tchila is the right description. And once you say Ein Lo Tchila, then you automatically understand that by the Eibishter, Ein Sof means the Emesa Ein Sof. So therefore the right description would be Ein Lo Tchila. So that point that we said before remains. But on the other hand, what's the authentic concept of Ein Sof? Only by the Eibishter himself. If so, the question becomes, how is it shaykh to say that the Oyer is Ein Sof? If the Oyer is not the Eibishter himself, it's only a revelation from the Eibishter, so how is it shaykh to say that the Oyer is Be'emes Ein Sof? So this is the Stirim Minei Beis asking the very. He's saying that it's not the Eibishter himself, and it's so much so not the Eibishter himself, it's a Ha'ara Ba'alma. Ha'ara means it's just a ray, there's nothing of the Eibishter here. So how is it Ein Sof? That's the Shaila. So we come back to the point of Oyer Mein Amor, as we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem next week.